I guess I had just kind of like the right amount of trauma, right? Like enough so that there was stuff to work with, that I had cycles to break, but not so much that it was, I didn't have flashbacks. I didn't, I mean, in my dreams, I have had flashbacks, but that kind of thing. It was just the right amount, but it is something we're so much more familiar with now. We know about capital T trauma and lowercase t trauma, right? We know that things in our past, we can process them differently in different places, and sometimes we don't process them. And you use the metaphor, I like this, of a trauma app kind of running in the background of our parenting. Can you walk us through what that means and how it shows up for us in everyday moments with our kids?
I think it's very true, like your observation of the just right amount of trauma, right? In a way, the just right amount of trauma is worse, because when you've had the ripped from the headlines trauma, you're traumatized because you're like, okay, this horrible thing happened. I was in a bombing, or, I was in a car crash. My story, which is in the book, is pretty traumatic. Anybody would agree with that. But the truth is, I push back on the notion of big T versus little t trauma, because my definition of trauma is any experience that's too big for your brain to metabolize, anything that shook your sense of self, or that shook your sense of safety in the world, and anything you had to cope with alone. And if you have those three things, you're traumatized. So when we expand the definition that way, a lot of things that people would define as little t trauma are quite traumatic. Being harshly mocked and criticized by a teacher and the whole class laughs could be quite traumatic, depending on who it happens to and how it lands on their nervous system. But that's not the ripped from the headlines, 14 people in car crash kind of, right, story. So in a way, the just right amount of trauma is deceptive, because we say, oh, I'm not really traumatized. And then we play trauma poker. We're like, well, she has this, I'll raise her that. But that might not actually be the traumatic experience, like the thing that left the scars. So the way I look at the trauma app, it's a very long way of answering your question, but the way I look at the trauma app is, when we're traumatized, our brain needs to create an operating principle to restore our sense of self and our sense of safety, right? Because in that moment of trauma, the brain says like, oh my gosh, what just happened to me? All right, from now on, I'm going to do this so that it never happens again. And that's the trauma app algorithm. So let's say you're harshly mocked by your teacher. You have a parent who constantly criticizes you and fat shames you, right? An experience that many of us have gone through, right? And it's not a ripped from the headlines experience. And from that, you learn, I will always people please. No one will ever be mad at me. If no one's ever mad at me, no one will have a reason to criticize me. No one will have a reason to make me feel bad or to exclude me. So you become a people pleaser. So your trauma app says, anytime you notice people upset, say yes, right? Makes you feel more safe.
Yeah.
Does it actually make you more safe? Probably not. If you say yes to your drunk boss about like going with him to the back room during a holiday party, that might not make you more safe. But the trauma app toggles on, it makes you feel safe.